moment of clarity. A brief, albeit fleeting glimpse of reality. What my mother used to call a bolt from the blue. Peter and James and John were eyewitnesses of Jesus' majesty. They saw for a moment the truth, the way things really are. The veil was drawn back, and Jesus, in all of his glory, was revealed. I think it's really important to recognize that who Jesus is didn't change in that moment. The disciples' perception changed in that moment. They saw the real Jesus. This guy who they were hanging around with, who they were walking and talking with along the Sea of Galilee, was also the Son of God, was also the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, was also this majestic, transfigured being, flanked by Moses and Elijah on either side. I'll say more about that reality a little bit later, but keep in mind that Jesus didn't change in that moment. The perspective of the disciples changed. Now, Moses and Elijah are pretty far up there in the Hebrew pantheon. They're big hitters. That's like having, I don't know, how do you say his name? Shohei Ohtani or whatever in your lineup, right? Wow. If only the Cubs could have gotten him to come and be in their lineup, we'd be assured a place in the postseason. I think I'm feeding back a little bit, so maybe it needs to be turned down just a touch. Moses and Elijah are there with Jesus, representing the law, Moses, the lawgiver, and the prophets, Elijah, the chief of the prophets. And Jesus is the completion of the law and the fulfillment of the prophets. And they're talking about, this is a little bit of coded language, they're talking about his departure that he would accomplish in Jerusalem. But you probably know that that means his passion, his crucifixion, death, and resurrection. That's where they're heading. When they go up the mountain, they're on their way to Jerusalem to accomplish what it was that Jesus came to do. To pour out his life, to lay down his life out of love, to reveal to the world God's purpose for the whole of creation. So Jesus' departure means his passion, the suffering, crucifixion, death, and resurrection that he would endure in the coming days. And all of this happened to God's beloved Son, the chosen one. And all of it happened to the same Jesus that is revealed to the disciples on the mountain. They're seeing Jesus through all kinds of filters and veils. Maybe it's a veil of suffering. Maybe it's a veil of anger when he turns over the tables in the temple. They're seeing Jesus through all these filters, but it's the same Jesus. The truth about Jesus is that he is God's beloved Son, the chosen one. All of this happens to the one who, when the veil is removed, is resplendent, radiant, transfigured, and transfiguring. There's another transfiguration that takes place on the cross. It happens in Luke's gospel when the centurion, after beholding all that happens to Jesus, says, "Truly, this is God's Son." We get that bolt from the blue. We get that sense of the real truth behind the veil. Some biblical scholars believe that the story of the Transfiguration, as we receive it in Luke's Gospel, is a misplaced resurrection appearance. That like somehow the deck of cards that Luke was working with got mixed up. And when he laid the cards out all on the table, the Transfiguration, which occurs sort of at the midpoint of Jesus' ministry, really should have been told at the end, after the resurrection. I don't like that interpretation, because it takes away from the sense of Jesus being resurrection, whether in time and space or not. Jesus was raised before he was born. Jesus is risen at his birth, and in his ministry, and in his suffering, and in his crucifixion, and in his death, and in his resurrection, and now and forever. What do we say during the Eucharistic prayer more often than not? Christ has died. Christ is risen. Christ will come again. Is risen. I had an acolyte once who was standing next to me at the altar, and she said, "Christ has died, Christ has risen, and Christ will come again." And I stopped and said, "No, wait a second. Christ is risen. It's not an event that took place in the past. We don't talk about the resurrection in the past tense. The resurrection is now. It's as real to us, it should be as real to us as it was to his disciples on that mountaintop, or to the friends that he appeared to after he came out of the tomb. Christ has died, Christ is risen, and Christ will come again. We get a glimpse of the truth here. And as we live our daily lives, all kinds of veils are drawn over our eyes. And we fail to see with clarity. But the truth doesn't change. And Christ is risen. Yesterday, today, and forever.